Hey guys, before we go any further, do me a favor. Notice your jaw for a second, the way it sits, the way it wants, just faintly, to open. Think about your last yawn today, the one in the elevator, in front of your laptop, over your morning coffee. If, by the time you reach the end of this sentence, your mouth is creeping open in that slow, irresistible stretch, then congratulations, you've just joined a chain reaction that started long before there were offices, coffee, or even words. Yawning is one of those things so ordinary we almost forget it exists, like blinking or swallowing. Yet it's weirdly dramatic. The long inhalation, the wide-open mouth that seems to unhinge, the brief, vulnerable moment where your eyes squeeze shut and you're not quite in control of your face. It makes people look bored, sleepy, or rude. But it also spreads through a room as if someone sneezed boredom into the air. One person yawns, another follows, then another, until the whole group is silently shouting into the void. It feels like a joke nature is playing on us. But yawns have been here longer than jokes, longer than written history, longer than cities, empires, or the idea of boredom itself. Animals yawn. Fetuses in the womb yawn. You can imagine someone in 2026 flopping onto the couch after a long day and tugging their jaw open in the exact same way a herder did 5,000 years ago, or a Neanderthal did 50,000 years ago. That's what this story is really about. The history of yawns as they appear in daily life, among the people who rarely make it into the history books. The farmers and slaves, servants and shopkeepers, soldiers and mothers who spent their lives somewhere between dawn and dark and yawned their way through both. So let's step backward, far beyond written records, into a time when there were no books, no clocks, no beds shaped like ours, and still, unmistakably, yawns. Picture a small fire, not in a modern fireplace, but in a circle of stones, dimming at the edge of a cave mouth. Outside, night is pressing in with the sounds of insects and distant animal calls. Inside, a cluster of early humans, wrapped in whatever skins or woven grasses pass for blankets, are winding down. One of them, tired from a day tracking a herd or digging for roots, stretches and lets out a long, jaw-cracking yawn. There are no words yet for tired, no shared concept of bedtime, but bodies speak their own language. Another person glances over, and without entirely knowing why, their own mouth pulls wide in an echoing stretch. A child blinks, yawns, and nestles closer to their parent. Within a few minutes, the whole little group is quiet. We don't know what they thought a yawn meant. We don't know if they noticed the contagiousness the way we do, or if they silently accepted it the way you accept the sensation of standing near a fire. It warms you. It doesn't ask your permission. But in their daily lives, yawns were already scheduling things, telling bodies it was time to rest, smoothing the shift from work to sleep, tightening that invisible rope that tied individuals into a group. One yawn might be the physical expression of fatigue, a cascade of yawns, the body's way of sinking a community. Fast forward thousands of years. Human groups get larger, and language slowly wraps itself around everything people experience. The sun rises and sets as it always has. People wake to tend animals, pull water, grind grains. Dawn comes with the same heavy-lidded blinks and huge involuntary jaw stretches. Before anyone writes a single word about gods or kings, the very first ritual of the morning might be this: fire rekindled, bodies gathering, and someone letting out a yawn so big it almost feels like a roar. Eventually, though, people begin to explain things. The world fills up with stories. Storms are caused by spirits. Disease is punishment or possession. Dreams are messages. And the yawn, so obvious, so hard to ignore, begs for explanation too. In the ancient cities of Mesopotamia, places like Ur and Babylon, where people baked mud bricks and etched their words into clay tablets, yawns entered the quiet, bureaucratic world of scribes. Picture a scribe hunched over a tablet just after dawn, copying omen lists that catalog every twitch and hiccup of daily life as potential signs from the gods. Outside, marketplace stalls are being set up. The smell of bread and smoke seeps in. The scribe is tired. He stayed up late reciting prayers, eating, maybe secretly drinking with friends. His eyes sting. His mouth opens in a long, involuntary pull. In some of these omen texts, abnormalities of the mouth, breath, and face are recorded as possible portents. Later cultures around the region would come to believe that the mouth was a portal, a gate through which spirits could enter and exit. When you yawned, your mouth suddenly became a wide, unguarded passage. It was an opportunity, depending on who you asked, for something unseen to slip in. We can imagine what this looked like in ordinary life. A woman grinding grain in some dusty courtyard pauses, leans back, and yawns without covering her mouth. Her neighbor, startled, makes a quick protective gesture with her hand, mutters a short prayer under her breath. A child yawns, and the mother taps his mouth closed, scolding him lightly. "Don't leave the gate open." Perhaps the belief spread that you should cover your mouth when you yawn, not because it was polite in any modern sense, but because it was dangerous not to. In ancient Egypt, daily life revolved around the Nile and the predictable arc of the sun, but unpredictability still lurked in illness and misfortune. Egyptian medical papyri tried to catalog every bodily symptom and assign it a cause, often mixing practical observation with spiritual interpretation. A yawn could be labeled simply as a sign of tiredness or heat, but when it came at the wrong moment, during a ritual, in front of a priest, at a crucial part of a ceremony, it might be taken more seriously as a sign of imbalance or intrusion by something malevolent. Imagine a laborer hauling stones under the harsh glare of the sun. Midday heat presses on his skull. His muscles ache. He straightens for a moment, wipes his face, and feels his jaw pull open into a deep yawn. To a modern observer, this is just exhaustion. To him and his peers, it might also be the body's way of letting out bad air, an overflow of life force, or a weakness where a spirit could slip inside. Whether or not they always believed that, superstition would become habit. Someone yawns, someone else murmurs a protective phrase, someone else covers their own mouth just in case. Meanwhile, yawning is creeping into early forms of etiquette. In temples and courts, where people are supposed to be respectful and attentive, the sudden, violent openness of a yawn is troublesome. It interrupts. It reveals. It might be seen as disrespectful to yawn in the presence of a powerful person or in front of a sacred image, not because it signals boredom, that idea will come later, but because it breaks the tightly controlled pose of reverence with a weird, uncontrolled gesture. So people begin to stifle it, hide it, soften it. With each attempt to control the yawn, yawning takes on social meaning. As we move into the world of ancient Greece, yawning starts to get a more explicit medical and philosophical definition. The Greeks were obsessed with figuring out the why of everything. Stars, seasons, moods, illnesses. And yawns didn't escape their attention. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, believed that yawning helped expel bad air or excess heat from the body, particularly in fevers. One of his reported ideas was that just as steam rises from boiling water, vapors rise from the blood and need to be released. Yawning, in this view, was like opening a window in a stifling room. Consider the daily life of a Greek farmer in, say, the 5th century BCE. He wakes before dawn, when the air is cold and stars are fading. He yawns repeatedly as he pulls on his tunic and steps out into the chill. These dawn yawns aren't a problem. They're natural. But if later that day, while sitting in a physician's cramped little room with a feverish son, he sees the boy yawning over and over, he might worry. The doctor could nod sagely. The body is trying to rid itself of excess heat. Yawning becomes a symptom, a clue to what's happening inside. Greek philosophers had opinions as well. Some thought yawning cleared the head, that it was connected to changes in temperature or wind. Others noticed its contagiousness and saw it as an example of how bodies mirror each other. Picture a crowded Greek theater in Athens, an open-air stone structure packed with citizens watching a tragedy under the blazing sun. The performance is long. The heat and the drone of voices start to weigh on the crowd. One man's jaw begins to ache with drowsiness, and he yields to a deep yawn. The man beside him, catching it at the edge of his vision, feels his own jaw respond. Before long, in waves, the audience is opening and closing their mouths like a living organism, while the actors deliver their lines about fate and suffering. We have no written complaint from an actor about a yawning audience, but we can be sure it happened. Yawning in such a public, shared space would have had a double meaning. On the one hand, just human bodies reacting to heat, stillness, and monotony. On the other, a subtle social signal. If too many people yawned, perhaps the play was dragging. Yet, in a world where bodily functions were part of public life, people eating, sweating, relieving themselves without our modern privacy standards, a yawn might not yet be the insult it's considered today. In more refined settings, though, it could be frowned upon. At a symposium, a kind of elite drinking party where men reclined on couches, ate, drank, debated philosophy, and recited poetry, a yawn could be read as a small failure of self-control. The host offers wine, the flute player performs, the conversation spins around the nature of virtue or the good life, and in a quiet lull, some guest on a couch, warm and full, lets slip a yawn he can't catch in time. He covers his mouth, a friend smirks. To them, it might say less, "I'm bored," and more, "I am a body, and tonight it's winning over my mind." Half a continent away, in ancient India, daily life is also framed by dawns and dust, by chores and rituals, by bodies that wake, work, and tire. Early Ayurvedic texts, the foundations of traditional Indian medicine, made detailed notes on bodily signs and their meanings. Yawning could be classified as a sign of fatigue, hunger, or imbalance in the vital energies that were thought to flow through the body. It was not just a random gesture. It was a hint that something in the inner balance needed attention. Imagine a village woman in the early morning, sweeping the packed earth courtyard in front of her home. She pauses mid-sweep as a yawn overtakes her, the broom frozen in her hand. Her mother-in-law, sitting by the doorway grinding spices, looks up. "Did you sleep badly?" she asks. It's a direct line from yawn to diagnosis. Not that yawns are sickly by themselves, but they are part of the visible language of wellness that everyone reads without thinking. In ritual contexts, yawning had to be controlled. A priest in the midst of chanting sacred verses must not suddenly gape like a hungry animal. Nor should devotees yawn loudly in the middle of a ceremony. The body wants to, the rules say not to. So people fight the urge, press lips together, clench jaws, or turn away to yawn in secret. Over time, the idea begins to solidify the world over. There are appropriate and inappropriate places to yawn. The yawn is the same, the meaning is different. In ancient China, where daily life for peasants meant rice fields, mulberry groves, and crowded wooden houses, yawning was also folded into the broader concept of qi, the body's vital energy. Traditional beliefs linked yawning with changes in qi flow and with emotions like fatigue or sorrow. A man sitting in a tea house after a long day on the road, sipping something hot and staring at the dusty street, might yawn as his body relaxes. Another patron glances over, feels an answering itch in his own jaw, and yawns too. The contagion of yawns becomes a quiet, everyday example of how people resonate with one another, how one person's state of being can nudge another's. Confucian ideals of decorum and respect also influenced how yawning was seen in social situations. In the presence of elders, officials, or during formal ceremonies, showing too much uncontrolled physicality, like yawning extravagantly, could be taken as a lapse in respect. So, a young apprentice scribe, copying characters by lamplight in a magistrate's office, struggles against a yawn as the hours drag on. His mouth still pulls open, but he hides it behind his sleeve. Somewhere between survival reflex and social training, the modern habit of cover your mouth when you yawn is taking root in many cultures independently. Now let's move west again, into the daily world of the Roman Empire. Rome was a place of endless routines: public baths, markets, military drills, religious festivals, grain distributions. The lives of the rich and the poor looked wildly different, but everyone, in their own way, woke up and dragged themselves into another day. Picture a Roman legionary at dawn along some cold frontier river, armor stiff, breath visible in the chilly air. He's been roused by the trumpet before the sun. He yawns as he straps on his gear, jaw cracking, the movement stretching his face into something almost grotesque for a moment. His comrades do the same. The whole line of men shuffles and yawns, one setting off another in a chain along the row. No one cares about decorum here. The yawn is just an early morning battle with sleep. Later, in a different part of the empire, a wealthy Roman matron reclines at a dinner party, a banquet that has gone on too long. Dancers have performed, poets have recited, Dishes have come and gone. Her mind drifts to the chores she has delegated for the next day. The servants to be disciplined, the accounts to be checked. A performer drones on. Her eyelids grow heavy, and a yawn presses insistently from within. She hides it behind her hand, hoping no one notices, because in her social circle, yawning can be interpreted as boredom or disdain. She must appear endlessly entertained by the host's hospitality. For slaves, yawns might be interpreted more harshly. A young house slave assigned to stand behind the couch of his master's guest must remain upright and alert for hours. If he is caught yawning, the master might strike him or rebuke him for laziness. The boy learns very quickly the art of clenching his jaw until it hurts, suppressing the urge until it bursts out later in some quiet corner. In the fine-grained hierarchy of Roman households, even the smallest bodily movement can be a political act. Physicians in Rome, many of whom followed Greek medical theory, carried forward the idea of yawning as a symptom of certain imbalances. A patient who yawns frequently might be diagnosed with a particular kind of fever or exhaustion. In daily practice, that means ordinary people begin to notice their own yawns and those of their family members as part of a pattern. He's been yawning all morning. Maybe he's coming down with something. The yawn becomes not just a momentary lapse of composure, but a piece of data in the everyday healthcare of the ancient world. Religious life, too, had its own relationship with yawning. In temples, as incense drifted and prayers were chanted, worshippers stood or knelt for long periods. Fatigue settled into their muscles. A yawn in the middle of a prayer could feel like an intrusion, a bodily need pushing against spiritual focus. Some might interpret an ill-timed yawn as irreverence, others, more mystically, as a sign that a spirit was passing through or that some inner impurity was being expelled. Either way, people paid attention. As the Roman world slowly transformed into the patchwork of early medieval Europe, Christianity spread, and with new ways of looking at the body and its gestures. Monks and nuns, whose daily lives were governed by strict schedules of prayer, work, and study, had to confront yawning in a very direct and unavoidable way. Imagine a small stone monastery in the dark hours before dawn. The bells toll for matins, the night office. The brothers shuffle into the chilly chapel, bleary-eyed, robes rustling. Some are genuinely devout, some are simply obedient, all of them are very, very tired. The chanting begins, monotonous and soothing. One monk feels his jaw begin to prickle with that tiny warning of a coming yawn. He fights it, presses his lips together, but it wins. His mouth stretches wide, his eyes water. The brother next to him, catching the movement, feels his own body respond. Soon there is a discreet ripple of suppressed yawns through the choir stalls, sleeves briefly lifting to cover mouths. They all know they shouldn't. Bodily distraction during prayer could be seen as spiritual weakness, yet their bodies do not care. Rules in sermons from this era start to treat yawning, along with fidgeting, whispering, or drifting off, as small failures of attentiveness toward God. A peasant attending a long mass after a week of hard labor might yawn repeatedly. A priest might lightly chastise the congregation for their lack of reverence. But beneath the moral language, the reality is the same as it was around the first campfires. People are tired, hungry, cold, or simply human, and their jaws stretch open in answer. Outside of churches and monasteries, medieval life is brutally physical. Farmers in the fields, shepherds on windswept hills, smiths at their forges, washerwomen by the river. Everyone's days are long and demanding. There are no electric lights to stretch the evening, no caffeine in the modern sense, no weekends. Dawn breaks, and with it, a chorus of yawns in every shack and cottage. Someone stumbles to the door to let in light and let out smoke, yawning so hard it makes their eyes water. Children complain that they are still tired, punctuating their protest with yawns wide enough to swallow the morning. By night, in crowded wooden houses where animals might share space with humans, sleep is shallow and often interrupted. A mother, waking to feed a baby in the dark, yawns repeatedly, her jaw aching as much as her arms. A father rises to stoke the fire and checks on the animals, yawning into the cold air. Even in moments of danger, a guard on a town wall, a shepherd listening for wolves, yawns creep in, unwelcome but insistent. The struggle to stay awake is universal and timeless. Yet, by now, yawning has accumulated layers of social meaning. People learn, without anyone necessarily lecturing them, that yawning in the presence of a lord, a priest, or another authority can be risky. An apprentice in a medieval workshop, sanding wood or stirring a vat of dye late into the evening, might feel his body rebelling with a giant yawn. If the master sees it and interprets it as laziness or disrespect, there could be punishment. So the apprentice does what generations before him have done in temples and courts. He turns away, covers his mouth, and tries to make his yawn smaller. We can imagine the contagious chain continuing, down through the centuries, across cultures, language barriers, religious shifts, and social divisions. A Roman soldier's early morning yawn echoes in a medieval knight's visor-opening stretch at dawn. A scribe yawning over a clay tablet in Babylon is mirrored by a monk nodding over a manuscript in a dim scriptoria centuries later. A Babylonian mother smacking her child's hand away from a wide-open yawn so nothing gets in is echoed by a medieval mother scolding her child for gulping flies with his mouth wide open. The stories attached to the yawn change, the gesture does not. Through all of this, one thing remains striking. Yawning is mostly invisible in the big official records. Kings, battles, laws, treaties, these get mentioned, carved onto stone or inked on parchment. The daily waves of yawns that pass through those same kings' courts, those same battlefields and marketplaces, go unrecorded. Yet if we want to grasp what it felt like to live in those times as an ordinary person, we have to remember that those giant, uncontrollable stretches of jaw and chest were as much a part of their days as they are of ours. So far, we've watched yawns move from prehistoric firesides into the structured days of ancient civilizations and then into the strict routines of medieval religious life. We've seen them treated as portals for spirits, as symptoms of illness, as signs of disrespect, and as little moral failings during prayer. We've watched ordinary people try to manage them in front of bosses, gods, and elders, learning to half-hide them behind hands and sleeves. But yawning's story is about to shift again. New ideas about the human body, new kinds of work, and new expectations of behavior will change what a yawn means in daily life, especially for common people living in crowded cities and working regimented hours. For now, though, hold on to this image. Somewhere in a smoky medieval kitchen, a girl pauses in kneading dough, tilts her head back, and yawns so deeply it seems to rearrange her bones. Her mother glances up, feels an answering tug in her own jaw, and yawns too. Neither of them knows that they are part of a timeline stretching backwards to the first humans and forwards to you, sitting wherever you are now, perhaps feeling an oddly familiar urge to open your mouth wide and take a long, slow breath. Some centuries later, the smoky kitchen is still there, but the world beyond its doorway has changed. The girl at the kneading table has grown into a woman, then into a grandmother, and her descendants live in a town where the bells ring more insistently and the days feel tighter, carved into sharper segments by clocks, markets, and work. Governments are stronger, churches more organized, and cities more crowded. Long before humming factory lines and glowing computer screens, yawns are already learning to navigate a denser, more disciplined social world. Imagine a narrow street in a 16th century city, Florence, Antwerp, London, take your pick. The first light finds shutters creaking open, chamber pots tipped into gutters, and apprentices stumbling out to fetch water. Inside a cramped room over a shop, a boy of 12 wakes to the sound of his master's voice and the distant chiming of a church bell. His bed is a straw mattress shared with another apprentice. They have spent the night curled like puppies, stealing warmth from one another and from the brazier embers banked carefully before sleep. He sits up too fast. The room swims. The floor feels far away. His jaw stretches into a yawn so wide it almost hurts, tugging his arms up into a slow, reluctant stretch. That mingled yawn and stretch is so common it will eventually earn its own scientific word, pandiculation. But nobody here knows that. They just know how good it feels. Enough of that, his master snaps from the doorway. You'll have time to sleep in your grave. Move. The boy tries to snap his mouth shut, but a second yawn wrenches free as he fumbles for his hose. His bedmate yawns in sympathy, eyes watering. It's barely dawn, and already the yawns are passing between bodies, defying orders, indifferent to the scowl of a shopkeeper who has his own yawn waiting, lighter and quicker, just behind his irritation. This is one of the first new notes in yawning's story, the tightening of time. In medieval villages, days had been long but elastic. Work ebbed and flowed with the seasons. A yawn in the middle of a task was an annoyance, perhaps, but not a moral failing. Now, under the growing authority of churches, states, and guilds, time is being measured more precisely. Bells mark the hours. Clocks appear on public towers than in private homes. Being where you ought to be, when you ought to be there, is becoming part of being a respectable person. With that shift comes a freshly sharpened suspicion of yawning. In a church packed to the rafters on Sunday, the preacher can see the evidence from the pulpit. The sermon is long, the air close, the smell of damp wool and unwashed hair strong enough to make eyes prickle. A farmer's head droops, then jerks upright with a sudden yawn. Across the aisle, a young woman sees his open mouth, feels a tug in her own jaw, and quickly presses her lips together. Children wriggle and sigh. One boy's yawn is a wild, hopeless thing, his arms flung wide before his mother's hand smacks his leg and hauls him onto the bench. "Be watchful," the preacher shouts, seizing on the moment. "The devil loves a sleepy Christian." Are you so bored by the word of God that you gape like oxen? It is an old connection, yawning and spiritual danger, but now it is preached with new urgency. For a medieval peasant, nodding off in church might have been shrugged off as the result of a long walk or a bad night. For a 16th century townsman steeped in the rhetoric of reform and discipline, that same yawn can feel like a sign of inner laxity, a crack through which sin might creep. Out in the streets, printed pamphlets and new conduct books begin to codify such anxieties. The rise of cheap print means not only that ideas spread faster, but that suggestions about how a decent person should behave reach deeper into the lives of common people. Moralists write about idleness, sloth, and wandering thoughts. Yawning, especially in company or in church, gets folded into this expanding catalog of small but telling faults. Yawning is a grossness of manners, one guide for youths warns. "Keep thy mouth shut, lest men see thy teeth and count thee dull." The words are aimed at aspiring clerks and tradesmen, but apprentices and servants hear the message secondhand, relayed with extra sharpness by masters who themselves are anxious to climb a ladder of respectability. Underneath these sermons and scoldings, older understandings of the body still hum along. The humoral theory inherited from ancient physicians remains powerful. The notion that health is a matter of balancing hot and cold, wet and dry, blood and phlegm and bile. In this framework, yawning is often explained as an attempt by the body to expel bad vapors, to cool an overheated brain, or to stir sluggish spirits. A village midwife kneeling beside a pallet of straw sees her laboring patient yawn between contractions. She takes it as a sign that the woman's strength is flagging and calls for hot broth. A barber surgeon, watching a feverish child yawn and stretch, concludes that the vapors rise to the head and prescribes bleeding or a purge. In taverns, men explain away someone's sudden yawning fit by muttering about bad airs or marsh vapors caught on the road. To the people whose mouths are opening and closing, jaw cracking, eyes watering, these explanations are often less important than the sensations themselves. A yawn after hard labor still feels like relief. A yawn in the middle of the day, when one is supposed to be alert, still carries a twinge of guilt or worry, even if nobody has the precise words to describe that discomfort. Meanwhile, the geography of yawns is changing. More people are living in towns, often in tight quarters. Streets are narrower, houses taller, rooms shared. Families, servants, apprentices, boarders, and sometimes animals share air, bedding, and breath. Contagious illnesses spread more easily in such places, and so do contagious gestures. Imagine a narrow tenement room in Amsterdam or Paris. 3 families share this floor. The walls are thin, the air thick with cooking smoke and the smell of humanity. It is late. The adults are still mending, darning, scraping tallow into moldy candle stubs, but the children are half asleep. A little boy yawns in his corner, mouth wide, and his sister, watching, finds her own jaw responding. Their mother glances over and yawns too, partly in sympathy, partly in sheer exhaustion. On the other side of the wall, where another household sits on stools around a single candle, a woman pauses in her sewing, feels something tug in her face, and wonders if there is a draft. Nobody here has the language of mirror neurons or social contagion. They talk instead about sympathy between bodies, a mysterious resonance that can pass not just between people, but between people and stars, people and weather, people and God. When early scientists begin to study such things, they will adopt the same word, sympathy, the strange correspondence of movements, moods, and maladies. In the 17th and 18th centuries, as natural philosophers dissect animals, pump air into glass spheres, and watch mercury climb and fall in tubes, yawning begins to sidle toward the laboratory. A physician watches a bored student yawn during a lecture and decides this gesture must be mechanical, something to do with the lungs and the circulation of blood. Another dissects a dog, noting sluggish blood in the brain, and speculates that yawning is nature's way of ventilating the head. These ideas filter slowly into ordinary life, carried in the simplified form of household health manuals and doctor's advice. A mother, anxious about her daughter's constant yawning during the long winter afternoons, is told by a visiting physician that the girl needs more fresh air, more walks, less time in the smoky kitchen. A soldier's letter home describes yawning on the march and repeats what he has heard from the regimental surgeon, that it is the body seeking to stir the sluggish spirits and clear the head. Yet the old moral weight never entirely lifts. As armies grow more regimented and navies more disciplined, a yawn in the ranks is still a potential offense. On a warship cutting through cold, dark water, a sailor stands on night watch. The stars are hard points above. The deck creaks under his feet. He has been on his feet for hours, the bitter wind tearing tears from his eyes. When a yawn wrenches through him, he clamps his lips shut, fearful that if an officer sees him, it will be taken as a sign of slackness, a failure to be vigilant. He cannot, however, stop the ripple. The man next to him sees the tightening of his jaw, the slight lift of his shoulders, and feels a ghost of the same urge. Within a minute, the line of watchers seems to sway in unison as one, then another, and another yawn silently into the night. While ship captains and sergeants fret about discipline, another new influence arrives in Europe's cities and in its colonies: caffeine. Coffee, tea, and chocolate begin their careers as exotic novelties, bitter liquids drunk for their supposed medicinal virtues. Over time, they settle into an altogether more familiar role: fuels for people trying to stay awake longer than their bodies would naturally wish. Inside a London coffeehouse in 1700, the air is thick with smoke from pipes and the sour, sweet smell of brewed beans. Sailors, merchants, lawyers, pamphleteers, and pickpockets crowd the benches. The room is alive with talk, politics, scandal, poems, trade deals. One man, a clerk by day and aspiring writer by night, sits hunched over a sheet of paper. His candle is guttering. His eyes burn. He stifles a yawn, then gives up and lets it swell, jaw cracking. The coffee he is sipping offers a kind of borrowed alertness, a reprieve from his body's insistence that it has had enough of this day. Across the room, a newcomer walks in, cheeks flushed from the cold, and yawns at the sudden warmth and change of light. The clerk sees him and feels, against the coffee's buzzing edge, another yawn rising. They share, for a moment, a silent, involuntary greeting. Caffeine does not eliminate yawns. It changes their timing. It allows people to override their sleepiness for a few more hours, to continue reading, talking, writing, working. In doing so, it helps to shift social expectations. If you can reasonably be expected to attend a meeting at dawn and then sit in a candlelit room until midnight arguing about philosophy, then a yawn in the middle of such a performance can seem less like an inevitable bodily response and more like a comment on the company or the topic. In salons and drawing rooms, hosts begin to read meaning into their guests' yawning. A woman of modest means, invited to a merchant's house for an evening of music and conversation, sits with her hands folded in her lap. The chairs are hard. The air is perfumed but stuffy. The young man at the harpsichord is playing his sixth piece, and his sister is reciting a long poem about virtue. The woman's jaw aches with suppressed yawns. She knows that to let one out would be taken, not as a sign that the room is warm and the day has been long, but as an insult, a verdict of boredom on her host's entertainment. Do not yawn in company, etiquette books warn, increasingly aimed at the middling sort: shopkeepers, clerks, artisans who are anxious to be seen as polished and polite. Should it seize you, place thy handkerchief before thy mouth and let no sound escape. A yawn is a crack in your composure, through which others may glimpse your coarseness. Here is another important shift. Yawning has always been noticed. Now it is scrutinized. It becomes one of the small, everyday gestures through which people read and judge each other's inner life. A master, watching his apprentices at work, may interpret their yawns as laziness or ingratitude. A woman watching her husband yawn through her confidences may read it as indifference. A teacher watching students yawn in a hot, overcrowded classroom may see it as disrespect. In an 18th century grammar school, 30 boys sit at rough desks, scratching Latin verbs onto slates. The room smells of ink and sweat. The master drones in a sing-song cadence, cane resting within easy reach. Near the back, a boy whose day started before dawn with chores on his family's small farm feels the heavy tide of sleep rising. His yawn bursts out unbidden, a desperate gulp of air. Half the class follows, jaws stretching, shoulders rolling. The master slams the cane on his desk. "Am I so dull?" he bellows. "Am I to compete with your beds? Stand!" All of you who find my instructions so tiresome must stand until you learn to keep your eyes open. Yawning becomes a small act that must be managed, policed, even punished. For common people, especially those under the close eye of someone with power, a master, a landlord, a boss, this means learning to live with a steady trickle of suppressed sighs. Women, in particular, find their yawns caught up in the evolving codes of decorum. A domestic servant rising in the cold gray hour before dawn to light fires and fetch water has no time to indulge her body's desire for an easy, bone-loosening yawn. Her mistress wants cheerfulness, briskness, deference, not a slack-jawed display of fatigue. Later, when she carries trays into the parlor where guests sit sipping tea, she knows to keep her mouth shut, her face smooth, even if she has been on her feet for 16 hours doing repetitive, wearying labor. Respectable femininity is increasingly associated with control, delicacy, composure. A lady does not yawn, women are told, even as they live lives full of quiet, unrecognized exhaustion, bearing children in quick succession, managing households, producing careful embroidery by candlelight long after their eyes burn. Their yawns retreat into private spaces, a quick gape behind the scullery door, a long, unguarded stretch only in the last moments before sleep, after the candle is blown out and nobody is watching. At the same time, new spaces of leisure for common men and women emerge: cheap theaters, fairground shows, street performances. Here, yawning takes on another meaning. It becomes a verdict on entertainment. In the pit of an 18th century theater, artisans, servants, apprentices, and shopgirls stand shoulder to shoulder. The floor is sticky. The air reeks of spilled beer and sweat. On stage, actors declaim in elaborate wigs and costumes. When the play drags, when the jokes fail, when the actors' voices blur into a tedious drone, the audience responds not just with catcalls, but with yawns, a wave of open mouths rolling toward the stage. Somewhere in this era, the English language begins to use a yawner and to be a yawn to describe something tedious. Boredom becomes a named experience, not just a vague restlessness. To say, "I am bored," is also, implicitly, to say, "this situation fails to entertain or engage me." The yawn, long associated with sleep, illness, or hunger, now also signals this newer, peculiarly modern feeling that there is not enough happening to occupy the mind. Again, ordinary people absorb this shift indirectly. A young maid who endures a long afternoon listening to her mistress practice the same song on the piano might not have the word bored ready to hand. She just knows that her body wants to fold in on itself, her jaw to stretch, her mind to wander. If she is lucky, she turns her yawn into a cough or sneeze. If not, a sharp rebuke about respect and attentiveness might follow. Out in the countryside, far from theaters and salons, life is still governed by seasons and sun. But even here, subtle changes creep in. Agricultural work is being organized more systematically. Landowners experiment with new crop rotations and expect their laborers to show up at defined times, not just when the dew is gone. Poor relief becomes more bureaucratic, sometimes tied to time spent in workhouses or on parish projects. In those workhouses, children and adults sit in long rows picking oakum, spinning thread, or performing other monotonous tasks. The monotony itself is sometimes the point. The work is supposed to be unpleasant enough that only the truly desperate will accept it. Surrounded by the scrape of chairs and the soft rasp of fibers, a child's yawn stands out. Sometimes it earns pity, a murmured, "Hardly slept, poor mite." Sometimes it earns a smack and a barked order to sit up straight, to be grateful for the roof over one's head. All through this period, the strictly physiological side of yawning continues, indifferent to sermons and etiquette. People yawn when they are tired, when they are hungry, when their routines are disrupted. Soldiers on the march, market women hauling baskets, miners emerging from underground shifts, Mothers sitting by sick children's beds all feel the same strange pull in their jaws, the same mingled relief and discomfort. What changes is the social script wrapped around that pull. A yawn in the wrong place now risks being read as boredom, rudeness, laziness, disrespect, insolence, or lack of refinement. People learn to perform wakefulness even when their bodies protest. Behind this performance is a larger story, the slow, uneven march toward more controlled, more regulated, more surveilled lives. Once, a sleepy shepherd leaning on his staff could let his mouth gape wide to the sky, unobserved except by his sheep and the birds. Now, more people than ever are living under the watchful eyes of employers, overseers, landlords, and neighbors whose opinions matter. Soon, another force will amplify this trend: industry. As the 18th century draws to a close, factories begin to appear on riverbanks and city edges, their chimneys punching new verticals into the skyline. Water wheels and then steam engines power looms and pumps. Instead of working according to the rhythm of sun and season, more and more people will work according to the rhythm of the machine and the factory bell. Inside an early textile mill, the air is hot and thick with lint. The machines clack and thrum without rest. Children as young as 8 dart between them, tying broken threads and clearing jams. The day starts before dawn and stretches into the dim twilight. Yawns here are dangerous in a new way. Not because they might offend a master's sense of decorum, but because nodding off, even for a moment, could mean a hand caught in gears, a limb lost. The overseer watches from a raised platform. He sees the sagging shoulders, the half-closed eyes, the yawns that workers try to hide behind their arms. He hears the excuses. "I was up with a sick child. The baby wouldn't sleep. I had to walk 2 hours to get here." And he hears, too, the mill owner's insistence that the machines must not stand idle. For now, these early factory workers still return home to houses lit by candles or rushlights, to sleep that is often segmented, 2 periods broken by a wakeful hour in the middle of the night, a pattern inherited from centuries past. They sit on the edge of rope beds, untie their shoes, and yawn with the kind of bone-deep tiredness that makes conversation fall away. They may not yet think of fatigue as a distinct, nameable condition. They just know that their bodies feel heavy, their eyes burn, and yawns come in waves that are impossible to resist. In the cramped alleyways of new industrial towns, in tenements with paper-thin walls, yawns ripple through families at the end of the day. A woman stirring a pot of thin stew pauses to arch her back and open her mouth, feeling every joint protest. Her neighbor hears the creak of floorboards through the wall, feels a tug in her own jaw, and yawns as she rocks a baby on her lap. The baby, too young to know anything of etiquette or industry or boredom, opens its mouth in a comically wide gape, tiny fists stretching open. You can picture it, a chain of yawns passing from room to room, house to house, down a street where chimney smoke hangs low, and the future is arriving whether anyone is ready for it or not. By the time this future fully takes hold, in the 19th century of steam whistles, gas lamps, and clocks that govern every shift and train, a yawn will be firmly established as a sign of something more than mere tiredness. It will be linked in people's minds with idleness, disrespect, lack of interest, poor health, weak character, and lack of refinement, depending on who is doing the yawning and who is doing the judging. But that stage of the story belongs to the next part of this timeline. For now, hold this moment. An early factory town under a low, smoky sky, a narrow street where workers hurry home, shawls pulled tight against the damp, a child trailing behind his parents, rubbing his eyes. He feels a yawn building deep in his chest, an ache that travels up his throat into his jaw. He opens his mouth so wide his ears pop, tears springing to his eyes. His father looks back, sees it, and feels his own yawn rising, impossible to suppress. They walk on, their steps unconsciously matching, their breaths deepening together as night settles over the town. They do not know that somewhere, centuries later, you might be sitting and reading about them, your own jaw twitching, your own breath catching in that familiar, irresistible swell. In the years after that boy and his father walked home under the smoky sky, the world filled with more such streets, more chimneys, more factory bells. The days grew longer and more regimented. Work hours were inscribed on paper and posted on walls. Whistles and clocks agreed on when a day began and when it was permitted to end. The body, though, stubborn as ever, kept its own schedule. In another town not so far away and not so different, a woman leans over her washtub in a cramped back courtyard. The walls on either side are close enough that the neighbors can hear one another's cutlery and arguments. Steam rises in pale clouds from the scalding water. Her hands are red and roughened as she scrubs shirts that smell of sweat and coal dust. Her youngest child clings to her skirt. The older two have been sent to carry soup to their father at the mill. The toddler is quiet, thumb in mouth, head heavy against her hip. As she wrings out a shirt, twisting it hard, feeling the almost pleasure of the strain in her arms, a yawn climbs up her spine like a cat stretching. She tries to stifle it, jaw clamped, lips pulled inward, but the force of it insists. Her eyes water. The child sees her face contort, the mouth opening, and though he is not tired, he slept late, safe and useless. His own mouth follows. Their two yawns overlap, a clumsy duet. His tiny ribs balloon as he pulls in the damp courtyard air. For a moment, their breaths are the only sound above the slap of wet cloth on wood. There is no time to remark on it. She plunges the shirt back into the water. The toddler tugs at her apron string. Upstairs, a neighbor sneezes, a baby cries. Somewhere a whistle shrills, and work resumes. Far from this courtyard, yet linked by the same new rhythms of industry, a train shrieks into a station under glass. The roof is high and arched, the light dim and smoky. Third-class passengers surge toward carriages, bundles to their chests, hats jammed low. Steam billows around them, a manufactured fog. Inside one of the wooden compartments, 6 people sit facing one another on narrow benches. A boy in a cap, his collar frayed. An older woman in stiff black. A housemaid with her only decent dress under a cheap coat. A man with ink-stained fingers reading a newspaper. A sailor on leave, duffel at his feet. And in the corner, his knees pressed to the wall, a tired clerk with wire-rimmed spectacles, clutching a battered leather satchel. Outside, porters shout, doors slam. Inside, there is the muffled clatter of couplings taking strain. The clerk has been awake since before dawn, finishing ledgers by candle and then walking miles to save a few coins fare. He tries to read, but the type blurs. His jaw slackens. His head jerks forward. The yawn comes on him like a wave breaking. His chest swells, his throat opens, his mouth pulls wide, his eyes squeeze shut. He makes no sound, but his whole face reorganizes itself around this involuntary need. The boy in the cap watches, fascinated, as the clerk's expression veers close to a silent cry. The boy's own jaw tingles. It's not tiredness. He is buzzing with the excitement of leaving home for the first time, but something else, something sympathetic and irresistible. His yawn breaks out mid-thought. He barely notices his own limbs echoing the clerk's, the little shiver through the neck, the rolling of the eyes. Opposite them, the seam at the corner of the housemaid's mouth twitches. She fights it. It feels rude, like copying. She presses her lips together. Her nose wrinkles. The effort makes her eyes sting. The sailor laughs softly. "Go on," he says. "It's catching, like lice." Permission granted, she gives in, her yawn splitting her pale, freckled face. The passengers look away, as if embarrassed by the intimacy of witnessing another body's need. Someone opens the window an inch. The air tastes of soot. You might be yawning too, imagining them, your mouth half open in the light of a screen that has replaced newspapers and gas lamps. You might try to stop yourself, out of nothing more than stubbornness, feel the strange pressure at the back of your throat, the pull at the hinge of the jaw, the way your body longs to inhale more deeply than you usually let it. The train moves. The countryside flickers past, hedges and telegraph poles, slate roofs and grazing animals. In different carriages, at different times, the same sequence plays out again and again. One face softening, opening, stretching, another watching, answering. A virus of breath passed without touch. Far beyond the train lines, across seas plowed by iron hulls, the factories have cousins. In a city that is not quite a city yet, where the countryside still presses against streets laid in imported stone, a group of men and boys file into a textile mill owned by someone whose name they will never speak. They wear no shoes. The floor is slick with oil. The machines are tall and loud, their belts and cogs a blur. They have been told they are lucky to have work. They have also been told that if they lean too close to the teeth of the looms, if their fingers stray where they should not, the machines will not stop in time. One boy, not much older than the one on the train, stands at a spinning frame, tying off broken threads as fast as his hands can move. Outside, the morning is already hot. Inside, the air is heavy with lint, so thick it might be visible in the right light. He blinks it from his lashes, feels it catching in his throat. The overseer stalks the aisle with a cane. Anyone too slow feels it across the shoulders. Anyone caught slacking is docked pay. Yet the body cannot be bullied entirely. After hours of the same motion, the boy's mind drifts. His arms keep working by memory, even as his thoughts wander to a river he has not seen in months, to the taste of mango when he was smaller, to his sister sleeping under a mosquito net in their village house. His jaw loosens. His chest forgets the tiny, shallow breaths that the dusty air demands and insists on something else. A gulp of air, a stretching, a release. The yawn rises. He tries to swallow it. It spills out anyway. His head tips back slightly. His eyes half close. For an instant, his hands falter. The next boy along the frame, watching from the corner of his eye, feels his own body answer. A yawn creeps up on him. One, then another, like dominoes. The overseer turns at the sudden ripple of movement, the peculiar synchronous gestures, the sequence of open mouths. "What is this?" he shouts, cane tapping the floor. "Sleep on your own time." As though they had chosen this. As though the yawns were a small rebellion, instead of a reflex older than the overseer, older than the machines, older than the language in which he curses them. In kitchens and sculleries and back stairs of the same empire, servants stifle yawns behind their hands. A maid rises at 4 to light fires, to have water boiling when the mistress calls. In the laundry, steam and starch burn her lungs. She irons until her arms tremble. Later, when the family sits down to dinner in silk and candlelight, she stands by the sideboard, refilling glasses. Her eyes blur. She blinks hard, afraid to be seen yawning. It would be taken as insolence, a comment on the dullness of the conversation. Her mouth opens just enough to let a sliver of air in. Beside her, the footman sways on his feet, having been up late carrying trunks for guests. His yawn starts small and contained, then blossoms, dragging his shoulders back. Through the doorway, an older butler sees it and feels, deep in his dignified chest, the answering pull. He presses his lips together so tightly the skin blanches. His nostrils flare. He looks away, toward the polished silver, until the urge passes, leaving a strange emptiness in its wake. Yawns learn the rules of a given household, a given factory, a given street. In some rooms, they are allowed to ride the edges of conversation, a way for a father to say, without words, that it is late, time for children to wash and go to bed. In others, they are signs of disrespect or laziness, policed as strictly as posture and accent. Children, not yet fluent in this etiquette, yawn openly. They do it with abandon, heads tipped back, arms thrown up, small bodies arching in a motion that looks suspiciously like pleasure. One evening, in a crowded tenement where 6 families share 2 rooms and a landing, a girl sits by the only window, her feet tucked under her. Outside, the street is a ribbon of mud. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of cabbage and paraffin. Her mother mends a coat under the dim light. Her father has not yet come home. The girl is reading a book borrowed from a neighbor, words about far-off mountains and snow, things she has never seen. Her candle gutters low, her eyes ache. She rubs at them with the heels of her hands, leaving smears of soot. Her younger brother sits on the floor with a piece of string, trying to learn a new game another boy taught him in the alley. He watches his sister, the way her mouth stretches, the way her chest swells. Her yawn, when it comes, is sudden and huge. The candle flame seems to lean with the force of it. He feels his own jaw replying even before she is finished. Then their mother, glancing up from the torn cuff, catches sight of them both. Her own yawn, lined with tiredness, slips free. For a brief moment, there is nothing but the sound of their overlapping inhalations, 3 breaths drawn deep as they will get all day. 3 bodies momentarily synced amid the frayed fabric and the unpaid rent. Then the spell breaks. The girl returns to her reading. The boy knots his string. The mother threads her needle. Across the ocean, in another city of brick and iron, a photograph is being taken. A family sits rigidly in a studio with painted backdrops of pastoral scenes they have never visited. The father's mustache bristles with pomade. The mother's dress is her best, too tight at the seams. She has pinned her hair up in a way she saw in a magazine. The eldest daughter stands straight as a ruler, hands folded in front of her. The youngest, a boy, sits on a little velvet-covered stool, knuckles white around its edge. The photographer disappears under the black cloth. There's a long, buzzing silence as he adjusts plates and lenses. The air smells of collodion and dust. The boy's legs tingle with pins and needles. He kind of wants to scratch his nose. His eyes burn from the effort of not blinking. His body doesn't understand why it has to hold a single expression for so long. Facial muscles tremble, jaw stiff. A yawn steals up on him, as stealthy as a cat. He feels it building, a pressure behind his tongue. "Don't you dare move," his mother hisses through her teeth. He holds his breath, searching for a way to stop it. The sensation intensifies, tearing at the back of his throat. Finally, it conquers his self-control and emerges as a strange, strangled, half-yawn, half-swallow, his features contorted in a silent, agonized grimace right as the shutter clicks. Years later, the photograph will sit in a box in someone's attic, the boy's expression puzzling a descendant who will think he looks arrogant or angry. They will not see the ghost of the yawn frozen in silver, the echo of a reflex modern cameras have made easier to catch. Mouths opened wide mid-guffaw, eyes crinkled, chins tilted, the body in motion, caught mid-need. In another darkened room of another city, people sit in tightly packed rows, their attention fixed on far more fleeting images. The first moving pictures flicker across a makeshift screen, a train arriving, workers leaving a factory, a man watering a garden. The audience gasps and laughs and claps. Some duck as the projected train seems to barrel toward them. Some, having worked all day and stood in line to buy a ticket, find their heads nodding despite the novelty. The air is close. Someone's pipe smoke curls up toward the lamps. A boy in the back row, perched on his father's knee, strains to see over hats and shoulders. His mother, beside them, feels her eyelids growing heavy. The flicker of the projector has a hypnotic rhythm. Shadows dance on her neighbors' faces, turning their yawns into grotesque, elongated shapes. A man in the third row yawns openly, unashamed. The dark makes such intimacies easier. His neighbor, catching the outline of that gape from the corner of his eye, feels his own mouth go soft. He tries to focus on the miracle of moving images, but his body insists on its own miracle, older than cinema. Yawns ripple invisibly through the crowd, linking them just as the projected beam does, in an exchange of breath and mirror neurons before anyone has a name for such things. They have bought a ticket to be transported, to forget themselves for an hour. Their yawns betray the limits of forgetting. The body remembers its rhythms even in the presence of marvels. Then the marvels grow darker. In a trench lined with duckboards and mud, a man sits with his back against sandbags. It is sometime after midnight. The air smells of damp earth and cordite, metal and fear. He hasn't slept properly in days, only dozed in stolen snatches, helmet tipped over his eyes. Rats move in the shadows, slick with other men's spilled dinners, other men's blood. He and his comrades are told to stay alert. The enemy lines are close enough that voices sometimes carry. A flare could show them moving and make them targets. A moment's inattention might cost lives. Yet the human body is not built for unbroken vigilance. His eyes burn. The horizon is an indistinct smear in the dark. His rifle rests across his knees. He feels the weight of fatigue in his joints, a deep ache. His jaw trembles as the yawn creeps up, unwelcome. He clamps his teeth, but the pressure is too much. He opens his mouth wide enough that the hinge cracks softly. The soldier next to him, a boy really, barely out of school, hears the tiny crack and looks over. The sight of that wide-open mouth, teeth pale in the dimness, makes his own throat open in sympathy. For a moment, the two of them sit there with their mouths stretched, eyes wet, chests swelling in the same pattern, drawing in the same damp, cold air. In that shared reflex, there is a flicker of something like intimacy, like peace. It is gone in an instant, swallowed by the endless grind of war. Orders barked, shells screaming overhead, the ground shaking. A few hours later, they will both be woken from shallow, twitching sleep by an explosion, and one of them will not yawn again. In a makeshift hospital some miles behind the lines, a nurse moves between rows of cots. Fevered men toss and mumble. The air is thick with the smell of carbolic and sweat, iron and sickness. A pandemic is sweeping the world, hitching rides on troop trains and ships, filtering through thatched roofs and slum stairwells. At the edge of each cot, mouths gape, not in restful yawns, but in gasps, lungs filling and failing. The nurse's own fatigue is a constant throb. She has watched men who survived shells and gas succumb to an invisible thing that makes their faces darken. She does not have the luxury of sleep. She steals moments leaning against the corridor wall, eyes closing. When her jaw drops in an exhausted yawn, she half fears the air itself, wonders if she is sucking in death with every deep breath. Still, she cannot resist the pull. Her body knows only that it needs oxygen, that the short, shallow sips of a long shift are not enough. That same year, in a cramped apartment in a city far from any front, a woman sits up with her sick child. The little boy's forehead is hot, his breaths are fast and shallow. She has sat prying his mouth open to spoon in sips of water and broth. When she yawns, head tipped back against the wall, she covers her mouth automatically, habit stronger than fear of contagion. He sees the gesture, and despite his illness, his jaw quivers in a reflex he cannot escape. The flu will take many and spare many more, the reasons inscrutable. It will leave behind, amid the grief and the gaps at dinner tables, the same old everyday rhythms, the stretching of limbs in the morning, the deep inhalations at night. Between wars, in cities roaring with jazz and clattering with Model Ts, yawns weave themselves into new forms of daily life. A young woman stands behind a shop counter, selling hats fashioned to mimic movie stars' styles. All day she says, "This suits you," and "We have it in black," and "No, I'm afraid that's the price," until her voice becomes a script delivered on autopilot. She must stand straight, must smile, must seem perennially fresh. In the lulls between customers, she feels yawns arriving like mischievous friends. She hides them behind her hand, behind the excuse of a cough. Her colleague, arranging the window display, sees her shoulders shift, the slight lift of her chest, and his own lungs respond. Across town, in a cramped office with rows of desks and clacking typewriters, men in shirt sleeves and women with bobbed hair tap out letters until their fingers ache. The clock on the wall crawls. Late in the afternoon, a wave of tiredness rolls through the room, almost audible. One typist, staring at the same sentence for the third time, loses the thread of the words. Her throat feels tight. Her back aches. She yawns, long and slow, eyes scrunching shut. The sound of her intake of breath is almost a whistle. At the next desk, a young man correcting proofs glances over. The sight of her yawn is an instant spell. His own jaw loosens, his own lungs swell. Soon, half a dozen people are yawning in sequence, like a human chorus of breaths. No one remarks on it. It would be silly to point out something so ordinary. Yet in that office, as in the factories and trenches and tenements, yawns are one of the few things that ignore job title and gender and age, pulling everyone out of their individual thoughts into a chorus of shared physiology. Then comes the financial crash, the breadlines, the dust. On a farm turned to dryness by years without rain, a man and his wife and their children sit at a rickety table eating a thin soup of whatever they could boil. Outside, the wind scours the fields, lifting the topsoil into choking storms. The sky is often brown. They are not tired just from work. They are tired from worry, from going to bed hungry and hoping the children will not notice that the parents' bowls are emptier. Their yawns have a hollow sound, pulled from deep in their chests. The children's ribs show beneath their shirts as they stretch and inhale. At night, when the dust seeps under the door and into their lungs, they cough, and when they cough too much, their throats tickle and demand yawns, the two reflexes tangling. They lie awake, eyes stinging, jaws aching, bodies craving a restfulness the conditions will not grant. In a city on the same continent, a line of men waiting for work down at the dock stands in thin coats, hands in pockets. They shift from foot to foot. Some make idle conversation, others stare blankly. The cold creeps up through their souls. One man yawns not just from lack of sleep, but from a deeper weariness, a bone-deep exhaustion of searching and being turned away. The man behind him sees the back of his head tilt, the jaw hinge, and feels his own mouth open. Another ripple, another sequence. These men do not know one another's names, but their yawns bind them for a second in the same small, helpless need for breath and rest and a break in the monotony of waiting. When the next war comes, the patterns repeat on a larger, more mechanized scale. Men in uniforms of many colors yawn in barracks and foxholes. Women in factories yawn over lathes and conveyor belts and assembly lines, building weapons, sewing uniforms, making the things that destroy and the things that keep others alive. In a city under blackout, a family sits in a cramped shelter as sirens wail overhead. The air is stale, the walls sweat. Children drowse on benches, their heads in their mother's laps. An old man snores softly. Each time the bombs fall closer, a wave of fear ripples through the packed bodies. Between these shocks, the ordinary asserts itself. A child yawns, rubbing his eyes with grubby fists. His sister, watching, yawns too, though she's not tired, just scared and bored and cramped. Their mother's yawn is jagged, catching on a sob she refuses to let out. The women around her pick it up, their jaws loosening in mimicry. Above them, entire streets are flattened, ceilings and beds and dinner tables are crushed. Yet in the shelters, the human need to open the mouth wide and pull in air persists. When the all-clear finally sounds, they emerge, blinking into a changed city, stretching their limbs, their lungs, yawning not just in fatigue, but in a kind of disbelief that the world is still here, that they are still here to fill it with their breath. In a submarine beneath the same war's seas, sailors move through dim, cramped corridors that smell of metal and oil and men. There is no day or night in the depths, only shifts. Artificial lights buzz overhead. The air grows stale between times when they can surface and refresh it. Their sleep is chopped into pieces. Dreams are vivid, strange. Yawns are constant companions. But here they are tinged with something else, the body's quiet panic at the close, recycled air. Each giant inhalation feels inadequate. A sailor yawns, jaw nearly dislocating, and his bunkmate, watching him, feels both the contagious tug to yawn and a spike of claustrophobic fear. What if there is not enough air to feed these greedy mouths? On the other side of the conflict, in a factory where prisoners labor under guard, yawns are dangerous. A man from one country, a man from another, a man who has no country anymore, all of them bending over the same tools. The guards bark if they see anyone pause. Sleep is rationed, hunger is constant. When one prisoner, staggering, slips into a yawn mid-task, his mind blank with fatigue, a guard cuffs him across the face. Blood fills his mouth. His jaw still completes the reflex, muscles finishing their contraction while the rest of his body flinches. The men beside him, seeing his punishment, feel their own yawns as tiny rebellions, complicit and covert. They learn to stifle them, to perform them internally where possible, throttling their body's cries for rest. War ends, as wars always do, not cleanly, not quickly, but with a long, messy winding down. Soldiers come home. Some do not sleep well for years. Some cannot hear a car backfire without flinching. Many find themselves yawning in peacetime in ways that surprise them, in cinema seats, on buses, at kitchen tables. The adrenaline that kept them taut for so long has ebbed, leaving an emptiness the body tries to fill with air. New suburbs spread out from crowded cities like spilled milk, houses with little patches of lawn, with garages and television sets and toasters and all the conveniences the advertisements promise. In one such suburb, a man in a tie loosens it as he comes through the door, hanging his hat on a dedicated rack. His shoulders slump. His wife stands at the stove stirring something from a box. Their children sit at the table doing homework under a bright overhead light. The radio murmurs in the corner. The day's labor, at desk and sink and classroom, has been long, but not life-threatening. The family's yawns carry more boredom than fear. At the dinner table, the youngest child's jaw cracks open, revealing the small white teeth he will soon lose. The older sibling laughs. "You're bored," she says. "I'm tired," he protests. Their father, seating himself, yawns too, an echo that crosses age. Their mother follows. For a few seconds, the conversation is suspended as four mouths open in unison, eyes squinting, heads tipping back. They look, all of them, strangely vulnerable. Faces unguarded, teeth bared, necks exposed. On the newly built highways linking such suburbs to such cities, commuters inch forward in shiny cars, one hand on the wheel, the other drumming to music from the radio. Brake lights flare and die. A salesman in a gray suit, inching toward home, feels his jaw go slack. His yawn is a long, weary thing, a protest against hours spent hunched under fluorescent lights. In the car beside him, a mother with a screaming baby in the back seat glances over. Through two panes of glass, across the gap between their vehicles, she sees the salesman's face contort, the wide O of his mouth. Her own lungs respond, drawing in a deep breath, stretching her throat even as she shushes the child. For a moment, these strangers' bodies harmonize, their yawns overlapping above the hum of engines and the hiss of tires. In offices where rows of women sit at switchboards connecting calls with swift, practiced motions, yawns creep along the lines like hidden static. A telephone operator plugs and unplugs cables, saying, "Number please," hundreds of times a day. During a lull, she feels her head droop, jerks it up, yawns into her fist. Her neighbor, catching the movement from the corner of her eye, feels an answering tug at the back of her throat. She yawns too, making no sound, her lips barely opening. There is something almost scandalous about the reflex here, this involuntary slackness amid all the controlled, repetitive motion. Far away, in a laboratory where someone has finally decided that sleep is a subject worthy of serious study, volunteers doze while machines record the patterns of their brainwaves. Researchers peer at squiggly lines on paper, at slow, rolling eye movements. They note down when subjects yawn, speculating on what it might mean, proposing that it cools the brain, that it stretches lungs, that it communicates boredom or empathy. The people in the beds simply yawn because they must. Their jaws open, their chests rise. They are tired from being kept awake, from being observed, from being treated like instruments. Their yawns have the same flavor of compulsion as those of prehistoric ancestors sitting around a fire, those of factory workers under soot-filled skies, those of soldiers in muddy trenches. You, reading about them, may feel your own breath deepen, your own mouth opening almost in self-defense, as if to remind you that you are not just eyes and attention, not just a mind writing words, but a body that breathes and demands and responds. Soon enough in this story, light from other kinds of screens will glow in bedrooms and living rooms. People will stay up later and later, fingers scrolling, eyes burning. For now, in this slice of the timeline, the television has just begun to flicker in one corner of one living room. A family sits around it, watching a presenter with perfect hair talk about events far away. The room is dim, except for that electronic glow. Outside, crickets chirp, a dog barks distantly. Inside, the father's head nods, the mother's knitting droops. The children fight to keep their eyes open, afraid of missing something. On the screen, a guest on the show laughs, then, caught off guard, yawns widely. The camera swings away, embarrassed. But the image has already done its work. The boy on the floor sees it and answers with his own yawn. His sister copies him without meaning to. Their parents follow. The television beams images into the room, and one of those images carries a reflex straight into their nervous systems. Across town, another family does the same. Across the ocean, a different presenter on a different channel yawns off camera and tries to hide it. In every time zone, people sit up later than they should, eyes fixed on the moving lights, mouths opening in protest. If you've yawned at least once since we began, you've become part of this history, not as a reader, but as an actor. The reflex that opened mouths around fires and under factory roofs, in trenches and train carriages and bomb shelters and bedrooms, opens yours too. Your yawn is the most ordinary thing in the world, and also a tiny marvel, a bridge between your body and all the others who have ever sat awake too late, breathing in, breathing out, waiting for sleep, or for the next day, or for whatever comes next. That next part of the story belongs to screens and circuits, to airplanes and night shifts lit by LEDs, to cubicles and coffee, and the particular exhaustion of living in a world that never quite goes dark. But for a moment, hold the image of this middle distance. The war just ended, the suburbs just built, the televisions just turned on. And in houses and buses and theaters and bedrooms, a wave of yawns traveling through the countless, forgettable yet precious days of ordinary people. Electric light has been around for a while by the time this next stretch of yawns unfolds, but now it begins to arrange itself into patterns that will feel familiar to you. The slow glow of a television warming up in a living room, the humming grid of fluorescent tubes in an office building, the long white bars of highway lamps that flicker by outside a windshield. Yawns move along these new circuits as easily as they once leapfrogged candle flames and hearth fires. Imagine one of those brand new post-war living rooms, maybe in 1957. The furniture is still stiff, the sofa cushions not yet broken in. There is a low coffee table with ashtrays and magazines, a set of heavy curtains that can be drawn against the dark street. At the center, like a small shrine, sits the television set, its rounded glass eye glowing in shades of black and white. A family is gathered around it. The children have been allowed to stay up a little later than usual. There is a variety show tonight everyone is talking about. The youngest, pajamas already wrinkled, curls against one parent's side, eyes tracking the dancing figures until they smear with exhaustion. The older child tries to sit upright, too big to sprawl, too proud to admit sleepiness. The first yawn slips out of the father, who must wake up early tomorrow to catch the train into the city. It is a quiet, controlled yawn, lips pressed together so as not to be impolite. But even controlled yawns rearrange the face in ways no one quite hides. The eyes crinkle, the jaw shifts, there is that brief upward squeeze of the cheeks. The mother sees it and feels her own jaw soften in sympathy. A moment later, her mouth opens reflexively, her eyes squeeze shut. A hand goes halfway up to cover her lips. The older child, watching, feels a wave of sleepiness like a small tide turning. In the space of a few seconds, another yawn blooms, stubbornly resisted at first, then breaking through. The youngest, who does not understand trains or alarm clocks or productivity, only notices that everyone's faces are doing something in unison. The tiny body, wired to synchronize long before words, follows. A cascade. 4 bodies, 1 room, 1 flickering screen, a sequence of yawns that might as well be a family portrait. This scene repeats in rooms all over. The jokes change, the hosts come and go, the furniture goes from ornate to minimalist, the picture turns from black and white to color to high definition, but the choreography of the late evening yawn stays remarkably stable. A program runs a little long. Someone says, "I should go to bed," but does not move. Another person yawns, stretching legs that have been folded beneath them. On the couch in front of a 1960s variety show, in front of a 1970s sitcom, in front of a 1980s drama with big hair and synthesizer music, people's jaws open and close, open and close. The commercials that interrupt these shows will one day become obsessed with keeping you awake. Coffee, soda, diet pills, over-the-counter stimulants that promise to fight fatigue. But in these earlier decades, the cultural script around tiredness is still in flux. There are jokes about housewives napping in the afternoon, about men dozing in armchairs with newspapers over their faces, about kids who just won't go to sleep. But the idea that being tired is a moral failing, a lack of hustle, has not yet fully hardened. Across town from that living room, in a tall office building whose lights burn late, another set of yawns is moving in tidy rows. It is the mid-afternoon lull, about an hour after lunch. The clacking of typewriter keys has settled into a steady background rhythm. The open office smells faintly of carbon paper, cigarettes, and coffee that has been sitting on a hot plate a bit too long. Under the fluorescent tubes, the secretaries and clerks sit at their desks in neat lines, stacks of files to one side, in baskets to the other. At one desk, a woman blinks at a ledger. Numbers blur. Her jaw trembles slightly. She suppresses the first yawn, pressing her lips together in a thin line, hoping the supervisor who walks the aisles will not see it and interpret it as laziness. But the body is not easily fooled. A moment later, it insists. A full yawn arches through her, shoulders slightly lifting, eyes half closing. She glances quickly around. At the next desk over, the man in the white shirt and thin tie is already halfway through his own yawn, mouth wide, hand belatedly covering it. Fluorescent light, humming quietly overhead, has its own way of draining the world of texture. Under its glare, time seems to thicken. The afternoon stretches. One tired clerk glances at the clock, another sees him, then looks at the clock herself. Someone stifles a yawn, the stifled yawn looks painful, and that pain is strangely infectious. So the yawns leap from face to face, subtle as nods, obvious as stretches, traveling up and down the rows while the typist bells ding occasionally at the end of margins. These yawns are small rebellions against the idea that productivity can be a straight, unbroken line from 8 in the morning to 5 in the evening. They are the body's way of saying, this kind of time is not natural. You can cage daylight in an office. You can measure hours in punched cards and timesheets. You can demand focus through the entire shift. But somewhere behind the eyes, in the slow biology of circadian rhythms that remembers campfires and sunsets, the body keeps its own counsel. In the factory down the road, the yawns are louder, less carefully hidden. On the assembly line, the machines set the pace, and bodies must match it. A night shift begins at 10 p.m. The workers file in wearing uniforms or coveralls, hair tucked away from moving parts. The air is filled with the clatter and hiss of industrial processes, the smell of oil and metal shavings. Overhead, sodium lamps cast everything in a flat, harsh yellow. At the start of the shift, the yawns are theatrical, almost playful, a way of acknowledging the shared absurdity of being awake when most of the town is in bed. Someone stretches arms wide, joints cracking, a wide-mouthed yawn turning into a mock roar. Another worker, fastening safety goggles, yawns so intensely his eyes water, and he laughs at himself. The laughter doesn't stop the next yawn. If anything, it invites more. As the night goes on and the steady repetition wears grooves into attention, tiredness becomes heavier. Around 3 in the morning, when the circadian rhythm dips deepest, the yawns take on a slightly desperate quality. The jaw opens almost frantically, as if it could swallow wakefulness from the world. A worker glances at the clock, wishes the numbers would jump. A second worker looks over, sees the weary eyes, and their own jaw trembles in response. The whole line, synchronized by conveyor belts and schedule, is also synchronized by these small, involuntary gestures, each yawn a minor tremor in the communal effort to stay alert. Elsewhere in town, other people ride a different timetable. The nurse on the hospital's night shift has been awake since midday. In the small hours, she walks the quiet halls, checks vital signs, adjusts blankets. In the nurse's station, under light that is too bright for 2 a.m., she sits for a moment to write notes. Her pen stalls. A yawn climbs up, stretching her lungs to their edges, and for a second, she must close her eyes. She feels instantly guilty. Someone might need her. What if the call light over a door turns on while she is mid-yawn? The guilt does nothing to stop the next one. Down the hall, in the dimmed maternity ward, a new father slumped in a visitor chair yawns, head lolling. On a different floor, an older patient lying awake in bed stares at the ceiling, feels a yawn roll through his thin chest without quite knowing why. These yawns flow in the spaces created by a world that now never sleeps properly. Night shifts, on-call duty, 24-hour service, late-night television. All the infrastructure of around-the-clock living pulls bodies into wakefulness at hours when, not so long ago, most of them would have been in the dark, in bed, breathing slowly. And in every artificially lit corner, the oldest little signal fires, the body asking for a pause, the nervous system trying, however clumsily, to reset. On the roads between these places, in cars and buses and, increasingly, airplanes, yawns travel too. Picture a commuter train in the early 1960s rocketing through the suburbs toward a city center. The carriage is full of men in hats and women in gloves, briefcases and handbags tucked neatly by their sides. Newspapers are unfolded like shields, headlines announcing elections, scandals, sports scores. It is early. Some of these people have not yet had breakfast. One man sits by the window, watching houses flick past. His eyes are still sticky with sleep. The rhythm of the train, the gentle side-to-side sway, the clack of the rails, is almost hypnotic. He feels his jaw loosen and gives into a yawn, jaw cracking slightly. Across from him, a woman glances up from her book and catches the motion. It triggers something deep and automatic. Even as she thinks, tired already, her own mouth opens. A few seats down, someone else sees the fleeting sight of an open mouth, half hidden behind a newspaper. The yawns propagate through the carriage like a whispered rumor. No one speaks of it, but suddenly, several people lower their papers at once, blinking, jaws stretching. By the time the train glides into the city, Half the carriage has yawned at least once, little flags of tiredness raised and lowered without comment. In the decades ahead, the commuter train will change. The hats and gloves will disappear, the newspapers will thin, the carriage will fill instead with people gazing into small glowing rectangles in their hands. But the motion of the train remains soothing, the early hour remains early, and the yawns still pass down the aisle. The difference is that now, in certain late years of the century, some of those yawns will be captured. The grainy photograph of someone mid-yawn in a gossip magazine, the unflattering freeze frame of a politician yawning during a speech replayed on television, the home video of a baby's enormous yawn rewatched for delight. It is in this same era that the sky opens as a new highway for yawns. The jet age takes off, and with it goes the phenomenon you already know too well, jet lag. On a long-haul flight, the cabin lights dim. It might be afternoon where you came from, or night, or morning. The air is dry, the sound of the engines a constant roar. Tray tables are folded up, window shades pulled down. People shift in their narrow seats, searching for a position in which sleep might visit. Somewhere near the wing, a traveler tries to keep reading. The lines of text slither into nonsense. A huge yawn comes, dragging tears to the corners of their eyes. They rub their face. In the row behind, someone else yawns, eyes squeezed shut, headphones slightly askew. A flight attendant wheeling a cart down the aisle sees the yawns and feels the muscles in her own jaw respond in sympathy. She fights it. There is service to attend to. The fight itself only magnifies the sensation. Here, too, contagion works through glimpses. A face in the next seat, briefly illuminated by a reading lamp. The shining teeth of a yawn caught in your peripheral vision. The reflection of your own open mouth in the darkened window. Several hundred people, strapped into a metal tube crossing time zones at hundreds of miles an hour, are reminded every few minutes that their bodies belong to an older rhythm. Day and night, light and dark, wakefulness and sleep. Jet lag remains one of the most stubborn ways your body reveals its allegiance to that older order. You can cross an ocean in one night, but you will pay in days of mistimed yawns. Yawns at midday meetings, yawns during dinners when you should be awake, yawns missing from nights when you lie in bed, eyes wide open, brain insisting on daylight. The world shrinks, distances collapse, business goes global. Yet in the meeting rooms where transcontinental deals are signed, executives stifle yawns while someone clicks through slides. The camera focuses on handshake and smiles. The yawns live in the margins. As the late 20th century rolls forward, yawns become more visible and more suspect. A new ethic emerges, particularly in certain cities and industries. One that treats sleep as something to be minimized, optimized, hacked. You can sleep when you're dead, people say, half joking. All-nighters become rites of passage, for students cramming for exams, for junior lawyers finishing briefs, for coders getting a product ready to ship. In dorm rooms lit by desk lamps, groups of students sit around a table, empty pizza boxes on the floor, highlighters scattered among open textbooks. It is 2 a.m. Someone reads aloud from notes, voice dull with repetition. Someone else rubs their eyes. A yawn cracks the circle. Laughter follows. Don't you dare fall asleep. Another yawn, this time contagious, interrupts the laughter. A handful of yawns pass round, the group's good intentions momentarily scrambled by physiology. Down the hall, another student has already given in, slumped over a notebook, mouth slightly open in a silent, unfinished yawn. In the library, a row of students in front of glowing computer screens perform their own small choreography, typing, scrolling, yawning, sipping coffee, blinking at the clock. Coffee, that old plant from highlands and plantations, becomes the legal drug of choice for fighting yawns. Coffee carts on street corners, break room coffee pots, specialty coffee shops with soft chairs and free refills all feed into the new rhythm. A group of office workers stands in line at a cafe each morning, yawns punctuating the small talk. It is a ritual that acknowledges fatigue and then immediately attempts to silence it. You might think that in a world obsessed with alertness, yawns would be pushed into hiding, like belching at the dinner table or nose-picking. To some extent, that happens. People learn to clamp lips together when a yawn threatens during a meeting. They cover their mouths more diligently. They develop the art of the stealth yawn, a jaw stretch disguised as a thoughtful expression, a yawn folded into a cough. But the more yawns are forbidden, the more noticeable they become. A bored teenager yawning in a classroom is seen as disrespectful, not as proof that the school day starts too early. A bored employee yawning in a training session is written up for attitude, not as evidence that 8 hours of sitting under artificial light listening to slides is its own kind of physiological insult. The reflex itself does not change, only its interpretation does. At the same time, scientists take an interest in yawning as a window into the brain. In laboratories and clinics, people are shown videos of others yawning while researchers measure their responses. Electrodes on scalps, fMRI machines humming, notebooks at the ready, they chart which parts of the brain light up when you see someone yawn. They test children, adults, people with different neurological conditions. They begin to talk about contagious yawning as a phenomenon worth studying in its own right. Outside the lab, of course, people have always known yawns are contagious. They make jokes about it. Don't start, or we'll all be at it. They laugh when a line of dogs in a park seems to pass a yawn down like a relay baton. They tease each other, saying, "My yawn infected you," half seriously. The scientific language of mirror neurons and social bonding adds a layer of description, but does not change the experience of being ambushed by a yawn simply because someone else at the table had one. And the tables themselves change. The late 20th century is full of tables under fluorescent light, but also of counters at all-night diners, break rooms in factories that never close, call centers humming with voices talking across oceans. In one such call center, in a city on the underside of the world's clock, young agents sit in rows, wearing headsets. It is 2 in the morning here, but prime time somewhere else, where their voices will ring through living rooms and offices. On their screens, they see names and case numbers from continents away. Their scripts begin. "Good evening," even though outside it is very much not evening. Inside the center, the air conditioning hums. A row of faces glows blue in the light of monitors. One agent, halfway through a polite explanation about a billing issue, stifles a yawn so that it turns into a brief, strangled pause in his sentence. The customer at the other end of the line, sitting in a brightly lit kitchen halfway across the globe, hears only the pause and fills it with their own suspicion or irritation. They do not know a yawn just occurred in another time zone. At the next terminal, another agent, hearing the first agent's voice falter, glances over, sees the afterimage of a yawn, and feels one tug at their own jaw. They, too, fight it. There are call quotas to meet. Round the room, a wave of suppressed yawns passes, invisible to the customers who complain about services and ask for refunds. The global economy runs on such invisible waves. Container ships cross oceans at night while crew members yawn on watch. Truck drivers on highways yawn under the glare of dashboard lights, windows cracked for fresh air. Factory workers assembling electronics for devices that will later stream movies into your hands yawn between tasks, their bodies registering exhaustion even when the project timeline says, "Ship by Q4. In cities that advertise themselves as the city that never sleeps, neon signs and LED billboards give the illusion of endless day. Street vendors sell coffee at midnight. Clubs throb until dawn. Office towers keep entire floors lit all night in case someone wants to work late. Yet, even here, yawns move through spaces like shadows. Bouncers at the doors of those clubs yawn behind hands as the night wears on. Cooks in the back of 24-hour diners yawn over sizzling pans. Cleaners who come in when white-collar workers go home yawn as they push vacuums down empty corridors. If you stand on a high hill and look down at such a city at 4 in the morning, what you see is a sparkling map of light. Each little window, each billboard, each street lamp is a pinprick in the darkness. You cannot see the people inside, but if you could strip away the concrete and glass, you would see scattered bodies in various attitudes of fatigue. Someone hunched at a desk yawning over a spreadsheet. Someone in a security booth yawning as they switch between camera feeds. Someone in a hospital break room yawning into a styrofoam cup of coffee. All the while, at the other edges of the day, in bedrooms more or less the same as they have been for a century, the private yawns continue their quiet work. A parent sits at the edge of a child's bed reading a bedtime story. The child is trying hard not to give in to sleep because the story is not over, because sleep still feels like an unwelcome interruption rather than a mercy. The parent's voice slows. A yawn sneaks into the middle of a sentence, turning a word into a soft, blurry shape. The child sees the yawn and seizes on it as proof. "You're tired. You need to go to bed." They laugh, triumphant. But the child will yawn too soon enough. Maybe not immediately. Maybe the stubbornness of small bodies will hold off the reflex for a few minutes. Yet the sight of the parent's jaw stretching and eyes watering is an invitation as well as a cue. Somewhere in the brain, networks that track the emotional states of others are quietly updating. If they are letting go, maybe I can let go too. The yawn rides that subtle permission. In another room, a teenager lies awake, lit by the blue glow of a television, then a computer monitor, then, eventually, a much smaller screen. They yawn in defiance of the school timetable that says alarm clock at 6, bus at 7, class at 8. Their body, primed by age to fall asleep later and wake later, is in open conflict with the world's schedule. They yawn in the back of classrooms the next day, not because they do not care, but because the structure of the day was not designed with them in mind. The teacher sees disrespect. One or two classmates see the yawn and feel an answering heaviness in their own eyes. Throughout these decades, yawns continue to serve as quiet social signals, hard to fake and harder to completely conceal. You can force yourself to yawn, but a real yawn has a texture, a length, a depth that is difficult to mimic convincingly. Lovers lying together on a couch test the edges of intimacy by yawning openly or not. Friends at a bar notice when someone can no longer suppress their yawns and read in the truth that the night is over. "You're tired," they say, half accusatory, half concerned. The answer might be, "No, I'm fine," but the yawn has already spoken. In all of this, the yawn remains stubbornly ordinary. It has survived every change so far, from cave fires to gas lamps, from oil lanterns to electricity, from telegraphs to streaming video, from horses to airplanes. It has adapted itself to the rhythms of agrarian life, industrial shifts, office hours, gig work, global time zones. It has seeped into the spaces created by modernity, the open-plan office, the airplane cabin, the late-night diner, the 24-hour gym. And yet, somewhere in the last decades of the 20th century and the first of the 21st, something shifts again, subtly but decisively. Screens become smaller and more portable. Work seeps out of offices and into homes. Entertainment slips from the shared television in the living room into individual devices you can hold, tilt, glance at in bed. The glow that used to gather everyone around a single point now disperses, scattering into countless personal rectangles. With this shift comes a different kind of exhaustion, one less anchored to the sun's rising and setting, more to the endless scroll of information and images. People lie in bed, lights off, faces lit from below by their phones. They yawn at midnight, at 3 in the morning, at times when the old world would have been entirely dark and still. They wake to alarms playing through those same devices, eyes already tired. The yawn, faithful as ever, follows into this new environment, into the cubicle where emails never stop arriving, into the home office where the line between on and off blurs, into the chat windows where someone's typing indicator pulses while they stifle a yawn off camera. It pops up in video calls, in profile pictures, in memes that joke about how tired everyone is. The story of those yawns, of what it means to be tired and contagious in a time when connection is both constant and strangely thin, still unfolds. For now, imagine again the middle distance of this era. A train full of commuters under fluorescent lights, a call center at 2 in the morning, an airplane crossing night into day, a teenager in a bedroom with a glowing screen. Somewhere in each of these places, someone sees someone else yawn and feels the pull, the invitation, the reminder that bodies, whatever the century, remember how to ask for rest. The next part of the story belongs to that glowing, networked world in which even your yawns can be recorded, replayed, turned into content, and in which the question of who gets to sleep and when and how grows sharper than ever. But for a moment, stay here in these late 20th century rooms and vehicles and feel how the simplest reflex still links strangers and families, workers and watchers in a quiet chain of open mouths and closing eyes, stretching across days that feel both overfull and curiously incomplete. The next part of the story belongs to that glowing, networked world, the one that hums in the palms of hands and in the corners of rooms, where blue-white rectangles silently insist that the day is not over yet. In it, yawns still begin the way they always have, a slow swell in the chest, a spreading warmth under the cheekbones, a stretch of jaw and eyelids and lungs. But now, in this world, The yawn can be captured, sent, replayed, multiplied. It can be seen on demand. It leaves traces. At the end of the 20th century, computers began to slip from laboratories and office parks into living rooms and bedrooms. The glow that had once belonged to televisions now lived inside smaller frames that sat on desks and laps. The machines were heavy, the connections noisy, the screech and hiss of dial-up like a strange new animal in the house. But the possibility they offered, of distant eyes and words reaching into your room, felt weightless. It is late, the kind of late that used to mean everyone in the house should be getting ready for bed. In one apartment, a student leans toward a bulky monitor, elbows on the desk, fingers cold from hovering over the keyboard. The rest of the family is asleep behind two doors and a thin wall. A desk lamp burns, making a pool of light on the cluttered surface. Half-finished homework, a mug ring, a pile of envelopes, a printed list of useful websites. The modem has finally connected. The chat window is open. On the other side of the world, or on the other side of town, who can tell, someone is typing back. The student laughs quietly at a line of text. Then, almost without noticing, they yawn. It's a long one, hours of reading and squinting and holding thoughts in the head, suddenly stretching the face wide. They tilt their head back, adjust their shoulders, blink at the screen again. The chat continues. A minute later, the person they are talking to types, "Haha, you just made me yawn." The student looks around, a little spooked, before remembering that during the last message they had typed "BRB, yawning my head off." Just the word had been enough. On the other side of the connection, in a different room with different dust and different air, a stranger's body had read the word and answered with a yawn of its own. There is something new here, even if nothing about the reflex itself has changed. Yawns have always hopped from body to body, across tables, across crowded rooms, across the slowly shifting seats of oncoming trains. Now they travel through symbols and pixels, through words that can sit on a screen for hours or days or years. A decade later, someone will stumble across an old forum thread or a saved chat log and feel an unexpected urge to yawn at a joke written long ago by someone they never knew. The contagion suddenly has a kind of time travel. In offices, the screens arrive a little earlier, in the name of efficiency. The cubicles filling out the floors of glass and steel towers once had typewriters, then terminals, and now sleek monitors. The fluorescent lights above buzz, the air conditioning thrums. It is mid-afternoon, the hour when lunch has sunk heavily into the stomach, when the morning's coffee has worn off, when the distance between now and quitting time feels longest. A woman in a headset stares at her inbox. New messages bloom in boldface every few seconds. Requests, demands, clarifications. Somewhere in the building, an internal memo celebrates the gains in productivity made possible by email and shared calendars. Now you can answer in seconds. Now you can schedule every minute. The woman rolls her chair back from the desk, presses her knuckles into the muscles at the base of her skull, and yawns. The headset slides forward on her hair. She covers her mouth out of habit, though nobody is watching. A colleague in the next cubicle hears the breath and the small sound that escapes, feels his own jaw begin to creak open. He yawns too. Down the row, someone else notices the shift in air, the soft exhale, and catches it. For a moment, this floor of the building is full of hidden, stifled yawns, behind partition walls, behind screens, behind company logos. On the surface, the problem here is familiar. The tension between bodies that want regular cycles of effort and rest, and systems that want something closer to continuous output. But the screens and the networks they're attached to also do something subtle to time itself. Instead of 12 letters in the morning mail and maybe a few phone calls, there are now dozens or hundreds of messages arriving in a constant trickle. Instead of ending work when you leave the building, you can check in from home. Instead of seeing your coworkers only when you occupy the same physical space, you can be pinged, CC'd, looped in at any moment. Into this new, flattened, sped-up time, the ancient punctuation of the yawn drops like a stone. It is a reminder not only that the body is tired, but that time is still felt from the inside, not as a schedule or a quota, but as the length of an exhale, the weight of an eyelid, the slackening of a jaw. Outside the towers and the home offices, other kinds of work continue and are reshaped by the same technologies. The warehouse that once relied on paper lists and shouted instructions now runs on handheld scanners and just-in-time deliveries triggered by distant clicks. The night shift worker unloading trucks follows the rhythm of beeps and barcode scans, moving as quickly as the algorithm demands. There is no natural pause built into the evening, no midnight lull. Orders placed at all hours of the day, from all time zones, create a restless tide. At 3 in the morning, when the air outside is cold and still, he leans against a pallet for a second and yawns so hard his eyes water. A supervisor glances over from behind a tablet screen and frowns, not at the yawn itself, which is invisible in the metrics, but at the momentary dip in items processed per hour. Somewhere, a dashboard lights up. Productivity down by 2% in the last 15 minutes of the shift. A new email is scheduled, reminders about staying focused, about personal responsibility. The gap between who gets to yawn freely and who must hide or fight their yawns widens. In some places, companies install nap pods in their offices, turning rest into a corporate benefit, another perk for the lucky. A programmer in a well-funded startup stretches, yawns a theatrical, satisfying yawn, and then, with a playful grin, disappears into a sleek, egg-shaped pod for a 20-minute recharge. The yawn and the nap are framed as tools, biohacks for enhanced creativity, investments in productivity. In other places, workers are written up for inattention if they are caught blinking too slowly on CCTV footage. Content moderators hired by subcontractors in Manila, Nairobi, or Krakow sit in front of screens through the small hours of their local night, eyes burning, watching and flagging videos made on the other side of the world. The platforms they serve promise users endless, effortless entertainment at any time of day. The price is paid in the yawns and winces of people who must process everything too disturbing to be left unattended. Between these poles, countless small, ordinary scenes unfold. A long-distance bus in the global south rattles along a potholed highway at dawn. The driver has been on the road all night. The vehicle is cheap, the schedule unforgiving. The company saves money by skipping the cost of a second driver. The passengers doze, heads bumping against windows, necks at awkward angles. The driver's phone, mounted on the dashboard, glows with notifications. A news alert, a voice message from his wife, a banner ad for a new energy drink. He feels his jaw stretch into a yawn and clamps it shut, shakes his head, turns the radio up. There is talk in some countries of installing cameras in vehicles that can detect a driver's yawn and automatically slow the car, but for now, his body is on its own. In a 2-room house in a Brazilian favela, a woman working 2 jobs comes home just as her youngest child is waking. The child, hair tousled, eyes puffy, climbs into her lap and yawns. The yawn of someone whose body has had enough sleep, if not enough food. The woman's own yawn follows immediately. She buries it in the child's shoulder, feels the day's exhaustion rushing forward. And yet, there are dishes to wash, uniforms to iron, a quick bath to take before she leaves again. The price of her late-night labor, cleaning office buildings emptied of their daytime workers, is counted out in coins and in the minutes she cannot spend sleeping. The inequality of sleep has older roots, in class, race, and gender, in colonial histories, in the layout of cities and the distribution of noise and light. But the networked age sharpens it. The expectation that services be available at all hours means someone must be awake at all hours, elsewhere. The glow of one person's screen is mirrored by fluorescent glare in a call center or factory half a world away. At the same time, the language people use about their own tiredness shifts. Sleep becomes something to optimize, to track. In many bedrooms, the same devices that lure people into staying awake longer, phones, tablets, laptops, also host apps that promise better rest. A person in a small apartment scrolls through a feed long past midnight, eyes gritty. They know it's not good for them. They know because they read 3 articles about blue light and circadian rhythms in the last week. At 2 in the morning, yawning so hard their jaw clicks, they set an alarm for 6 and tap on an app that will measure their sleep with the accelerometer in their phone. Deep sleep, 2 hours, 14 minutes, the app will tell them tomorrow. Efficiency, 76%. Sleep, like steps, like calories, like emails, is turned into a number. They lie back, the phone on the mattress beside the pillow, and consider a moment of rebellion, turning the device off completely. But what if they miss a message, an alert, a change? The world, with its endless scroll of emergencies and amusements, is right there, always. When they finally fall asleep, the last thing they see is the glow. The last thing they do before their eyes close is stifle another yawn. Elsewhere, someone else does not have to fight for sleep at quite the same edge. In a quiet suburb, a manager in his 40s yawns in front of a streaming service that gently asks, "Are you still watching?" The day has been full. A series of video calls, a commute with podcasts, an evening of helping with homework. Now, the show he chose as Relaxation is playing its third episode in a row. The characters on screen move through their fictional dilemmas. The manager's head lolls to the side. He reaches for the remote, hesitates, and lets the next episode start. When he finally drifts off on the couch, the room is lit by the changing colors of the screen. The sleep he gets there will not be as deep or as restorative as what he might have in his bed, but it will be easier. It requires no decision, only the gradual giving in of a fatigued body. As the 21st century moves forward, the means of recording and sharing images become more intimate and more mobile. Cameras shrink into phones, then into laptops, then into doorbells and refrigerators and toys. Somewhere, a baby's first yawn is captured in a short video and sent to grandparents within seconds. They watch it on the other side of a continent or an ocean and feel their own chests swell with affection and their own jaws threaten to open. "So cute," they type back, rubbing at the tears that rise to their eyes. Yawns become content. Teenagers challenge each other in online videos. Try not to yawn while watching this. The footage is simple. 10, 20, 30 people yawning in sequence, their mouths wide, eyes moist. Viewers click, mostly for the joke, but also for the curiosity. How many seconds until I give in? The comment sections fill with reports. 30 seconds and I lost. Made it to the end. Reading the title was enough. I'm doomed. A few note with a kind of proud worry that they are immune, that contagious yawning is less common among people on certain parts of the neurological spectrum. Everyone else rides the wave. One person yawns on screen, another alone in their room, another in a train carriage watching the same clip, each body echoing the last. The cameras watch elsewhere too, in ways less playful. In some factories and warehouses, experimental software tracks workers' faces, looking for signs of fatigue, drooping eyelids, slowed blinks, yawns. It flags them as risks to safety, to productivity, and sends alerts. The official goal in company statements is to prevent accidents, to keep people safe. The unofficial effect is to make even the involuntary signs of tiredness sources of anxiety. A young man assembling electronics under harsh LED lights feels his vision blur for a second. He yawns, jaw cracking. The camera mounted above his station notes the shift in facial muscle patterns. A supervisor's tablet pings. Later, during a brief meeting, the man will be reminded to get enough sleep, as if that were always within his control, as if the long bus ride to work, the crowded apartment with thin walls, and the extra shift he picked up to pay for a sibling's tuition were choices made in a vacuum. People respond to this tightening net of expectation and surveillance in small, uneven ways. Some try to hack their own physiology, reading about polyphasic sleep schedules, micronaps, biohacking. Others seek out older practices, meditation, prayer, afternoon siestas reclaimed as acts of resistance. In southern European cities, where midday rest was once a custom, then derided as unproductive in a globalized economy, there is quiet talk among younger workers of bringing it back, not as a quaint tradition, but as a right. In one co-working space in Madrid, a freelance designer yawns at 1 p.m, eyes flicking between the bright screen of her laptop and the sunny rectangle of the window. An older man at the next table notices and smiles. "You know," he says, "this is when my father would close his shop. Eat, sleep, come back at 4. The designer laughs. "I wish," she says, but the idea lingers. A few months later, the co-working space experiments with a daily, offline hour. Lights dimmed, screens closed, people encouraged to lie down on mats or lean back and close their eyes. Some use it, some sneak work on their phones. The tension is still there, but something small is shifting. Other movements take shape on larger scales. Health researchers publish studies about the links between sleep deprivation and disease, about the way shift work erodes the body. Activists talk about sleep justice, about the way communities exposed to more noise, more crime, more pollution also get worse rest. about how the people least able to afford to lose sleep are the ones most likely to do so. Labor organizers add demands about schedules and rest to their lists of grievances. Predictable shifts, longer breaks, bans on mandatory overtime. A nurse in a crowded urban hospital, leaving after a 12-hour night shift that turned into 14 because someone called in sick, yawns in the thin morning light. Her feet ache, her eyes feel full of sand. She has just spent the night watching over patients' fragile breathing, changing IV bags, answering call bells, charting numbers in electronic systems. The city around her is waking up. People in suits and backpacks hurry past, holding coffee cups. She sits at the bus stop and lets her head drop forward, yawning so deeply it feels like the air might never go back out. In medical school, they told her that fatigue is a risk, that doctors and nurses who work too long make more mistakes. They also told her that this is the way things are, bodies on call, lives saved by people who keep going past any reasonable hour. She thinks of her patients whose sleep is fragmented by pain, by monitors, by the constant movement of staff. She thinks of a world in which the most vulnerable bodies, the very sick, the very poor, the very young, often sleep the worst. When the bus arrives, she climbs on, finds a seat, and immediately half the passengers around her yawn in sympathy. It is involuntary, this small chorus of open mouths. None of them know the specifics of her night. They know only what their bodies know, that one person's tiredness can echo in many others. By the time a virus circles the world in the early 2000s, the infrastructure of constant connection is firmly in place. In many countries, offices empty in a matter of days. The glowing screens retreat to kitchens, bedrooms, improvised desks. The phrase working from home becomes less a perk and more a necessity for the relatively privileged. For others, work becomes more dangerous, more exposed. In warehouses, in hospitals, in grocery stores, there is no remote option. In one small apartment, a woman logs into a video meeting 15 minutes after she has put her toddler down for a nap. Her colleagues appear in squares, each with their own backgrounds. Blank walls, bookshelves, the occasional plant. "Can everyone hear me?" someone asks. Cameras flick on and off. In one tile, a man forgets for a moment that he is visible and yawns in a big, unguarded way, head thrown back. The grid flickers with responses, a cascade of yawns, some suppressed behind hands, some half hidden by turning away from the camera. A few people laugh. Someone types, "contagious," in the chat. The meeting proceeds. Talk of deadlines, of uncertainty, of pivoting strategies. Outside, sirens ebb and swell. The woman feels her own fatigue like a weight in her limbs. The stress of the news, the broken sleep of a household under strain, the confusion of days that all feel the same. When she yawns, she mutely clicks the button to turn her camera off, as if that could hide the fact that she is human and tired. Elsewhere, a delivery driver works longer hours than ever, dropping parcels on doorsteps for people who are staying inside. In some cities, they are briefly celebrated as heroes. In others, they remain mostly invisible. He sleeps badly, worried about infection, about money, about his parents in another town. His yawns, caught occasionally on a security camera as he walks up a path at dusk, are stored in clouds of data, alongside images of pets, of sunsets, of empty streets. During this period, many people notice their dreams more, their sleep less anchored. They talk online about strange night visions, about waking up at odd hours. Some blame the lack of commutes, the blur between work and home. Others point to the dimming of the outside world's noise. Without the usual backgrounds of traffic, crowds, shared rooms, some bodies find their own rhythms again. Others flail without structure. Yawns on video calls become a kind of shared language, a way of acknowledging that the strain is collective, that the exhaustion is not merely personal failure. In the years after, talk about work-life balance, about flexible schedules, about the 4-day week grows louder in some places. In others, precarity deepens. The same technologies that allowed some people to work remotely also allow employers to reach further into workers' time. Emails on weekends, messages at odd hours, expectations of quick replies because you're home anyway. A programmer in Bangalore, working for a company headquartered in San Francisco, yawns at 2 a.m. as he waits for his team's daily stand-up to begin. His window is dark. The street outside is quiet. On his screen, colleagues appear in afternoon light, coffee cups in hand. They joke about being night owls, about burning the midnight oil, but for him, this is neither a quirk nor a choice. It is the cost of participating in a global industry whose rhythms are set by a different longitude. When the meeting ends, he closes his laptop, stretches, and feels a yawn rise for the 1,000th time that week. He wonders, not for the first time, whether his body will ever forgive him for this schedule. The climate, too, makes its presence felt in people's sleep. Heat waves stretch into the night, turning bedrooms into ovens. Air conditioners hum where people can afford them. In many places, they cannot. A family in a city built without these temperatures in mind lies on damp sheets, windows open to catch any stirring of air. Outside, the concrete and asphalt radiate back the heat they absorbed all day. Mosquitoes drift in, sirens echo. The father yawns, not because he is comfortable enough to drift towards sleep, but because his body is trying to manage discomfort and exhaustion at once. The child beside him yawns as well, sweating, restless. In the countryside, a farmer wakes before dawn to move irrigation lines, to check on crops that wither under new patterns of drought and flood. He yawns as he walks, as he bends, as he calculates, how many more years like this can we endure? The birds around him call, the sky slowly lightens. Somewhere in a distant city, someone taps an icon on a weather app and sees unseasonably warm nights in the forecast. They scroll past, already half distracted by a video of someone else yawning on a beach. And yet, across all these variations, the yawn remains stubbornly itself. It arrives in moments of boredom and overstimulation alike, in stress and in safety, in bright-lit malls and dim back alleys. It interrupts speeches and sermons, exams and dates, concerts and protests. In a crowd gathered to demand better housing or fairer wages or action on climate, someone at the edge yawns. They have been standing for hours. The speeches are long. The sun is hot on their face. They are still committed, still angry, but their body insists on a small, private reality: fatigue. A person next to them sees the yawn and responds with one of their own, then lifts a sign higher. In a library, a student poring over history books about labor movements and social change in previous centuries finds themselves yawning over a passage describing 19th century factory workers falling asleep at their looms. The yawn that pulls at their own jaw is an echo of that older tiredness, a tiny bridge between their present comfort and someone else's long-ago struggle. The future of yawns will likely involve more measurements, more interpretations. Already, researchers use them in experiments, trying to understand empathy, social connection, neurological differences. Engineers design sensors that detect them for safety features in cars and planes. Tech companies imagine products that can suggest ideal sleep windows based on your yawning patterns, your heart rate, your calendar. A marketing team somewhere drafts slogans about listening to your body, even as their employer keeps pushing out features designed to keep you scrolling, watching, responding. Yet there is also a countercurrent, a quiet insistence in many quarters that not everything can or should be optimized. A person standing on a crowded subway train at the end of a long day feels a yawn coming and does not suppress it, does not twist it into a joke about needing more coffee. They simply open their mouth, close their eyes for a second, and let the air flow in and out. Someone across the carriage meets their gaze afterward, a small, tired smile passing between them. No words, just recognition. In a village that has seen many changes but still follows some older rhythms, an old woman sits outside her house at dusk, watching the shadows lengthen. There is a phone in her pocket now, and she uses it to see photographs of relatives in cities she has never visited. Sometimes they send videos, sometimes they call. Tonight, she leaves it where it is, unlit. The sky darkens. She yawns, patting the worn arm of her chair, remembering the feel of hay and the smell of animals from the nights of her childhood, when electricity came later and the dark was truly dark. Children run past, laughing. One stops, sees her yawn, and imitates it, clowning. She laughs, which makes her yawn again, and soon they are both caught in a loop of giggles and open mouths. Somewhere else, in a tiny capsule apartment in a city of streamed light and perpetual motion, a young man lies on his back, staring at the glow of yet another screen mounted directly above him. He swipes through videos, strangers dancing, cooking, talking to the camera, complaining about how tired they are. He yawns once, twice, 3 times, feels his eyes sting, and finally does something that feels, in this world, almost radical. He reaches up, presses the power button, and lets the screen go black. The darkness is unfamiliar. It takes a moment for his eyes to adjust, to find the faint outlines of walls and ceiling, the little blinking light of the smoke detector. He feels another yawn rise, slow and deep, and does nothing to stop it. The breath moves through him like a tide, like a distant ancestor's sigh. For a second, there is no feed, no message, no metric. There is only his body and its old, undeniable way of saying, enough. Lay down what you are carrying. Let go. Across town, across continents, across oceans, countless other people are doing the same, or trying to. Some will be interrupted, some will lie awake, minds spinning. Some will slip quickly, gratefully, into sleep. Before that, almost all of them will yawn at least once, standing at a sink, lying on a mat, sitting on a sofa, kneeling on a rug, resting on a flattened cardboard box. And if you could see them all at once, the factory workers and the coders, the nurses and the drivers, the parents and the children, the protesters and the prisoners, the rich and the poor, you might notice how much this looks like a kind of secret choreography, heads tilting, jaws opening, eyes closing, chests rising and falling in long, shared breaths, a quiet dance that has been going on for as long as human bodies have needed rest, a contagion that is neither sickness nor sin, but simply a reminder written in muscle and bone. Somewhere in the networked archive of the world, a future historian of ordinary life will scroll through images and texts from this era, posts about insomnia, photos of napping cats, videos of babies yawning, complaints about early alarms, memes about Monday. They will see, among the wars and the elections and the technological breakthroughs, the smaller, constant hum of people asking the same unspoken question: when can I stop? When can I lie down? If they are honest, that historian will feel tired too. They may even yawn as they read. The history of yawns is not, in the end, very glamorous. It does not belong to great speeches or decisive battles. It belongs to the margins of days, to the pauses between tasks, to the way common people experience time in their own bodies. It runs through ancient caves and medieval workshops, through ship holds and factory floors, through classrooms and offices and bedrooms lit by small screens. It runs through you, now, if only as a possibility, a suggestion from your nervous system that you might be ready, for a moment, to loosen your grip on whatever you are trying to hold. Whether you follow that suggestion or fight it will depend, as it always has, on where and how you live, on who depends on you, on what your particular world demands. But no matter what you decide, somewhere, someone else is yawning with you, or because of you, or for reasons of their own. The timeline goes on, a very contagious story, written in mouths opening and eyes closing, in breaths shared across rooms and networks and centuries.